Citizen 12 is brought to you by Complexify, a social purpose corporation founded to support you living in alignment with your conscience and discerning what that is. Find out more at complexify.org. complexiphy.org.
Hello, citizens. My name is Paige Halsey.
And my name is Emily Bogan, and
This is episode 4 of the Citizen 12 podcast. Citizen 12 is made by and for anyone interested in the practical application of spiritual principles as outlined in our Citizen 12 steps. This is not a program or health treatment, but an inclusive space, common ground to share and learn. If you have not yet listened to episode 0, we invite you to do that. You'll get a good sense of what the show is about and hear our steps, which can also be found through any of our sites. Before we really dig in, our podcast is created in Seattle, Washington. We acknowledge this as Duwamish land and strive to honor the past, present, and future Indigenous lives here. Citizen 12 supports Duwamish tribal services by paying real rent. Find out more at realrentduwamish.org. Today's show is our follow-up to episode 3, which was all about feelings. We have a good list of follow-up bits to cover from episode 3, starting with, well, actually, I'll say I thought I might play with numbering our segments. Mm-hmm. And so we have 5 little segments for today's show. And our first segment, everybody's favorite topic, I'm being sarcastic, trauma? Sorry to say it like that. In listening to the show we recorded, I noticed that we tiptoed around trauma. We talked about things that could be seen as traumatic events, and maybe we did actually talk about traumatic events, but I don't even know if we used the word trauma, and I really don't want to tiptoe around that topic. Emily and I both are committed to providing a space where that can be addressed very openly and explicitly, and we want to practice that in this podcast. In fact, since the show, episode 3, I've been reading more about trauma-informed practices and am very committed to bringing a trauma-informed approach to this show. And we're open admission, we're still learning how to do that.
We're not experts.
We're not experts. And I thought we might kind of take a moment to sort of distinguish between pain and trauma, because fortunately there is pain that isn't traumatic. And, we were kind of thinking, I even myself, I've had a car accident that actually wasn't traumatic. And then I've had some car accidents that were traumatic. And it's a contextual thing. It includes more than just the explicit event that happened. It includes where we were in our lives and circumstances and all that stuff. So it's a complicated thing, what goes into trauma. I found a resource that I began reading in my search for trauma-informed practices called TAMAR, TAMAR, and we'll link to those resources in the show. It looks like the doctor who developed it has passed away now, but it was developed as a trauma treatment program, maybe even developed for incarcerated women. And just in beginning to read through the material, I found a bunch of stuff that I really liked, including that they talk about how trauma is really when pain overwhelms our coping skills. So, of course, sometimes pain we feel and we have adequate coping skills for it, and sometimes there's pain and it overwhelms our coping skills, and that's when, in their opinion, it's distinct and is traumatic. Another really useful quote from that Tamar material, I'm just going to read the quote and then I'll introduce our next segment. So the quote is, "So what? Who cares? Get over it." That's the attitude, the same one that was there in others who didn't protect you. Now it may be a part of you. So that's from the very beginning of the manual for trauma treatment, from this Tamar program. And it grabbed me because it really speaks to, well, that's very tough attitude. So what? Who cares? Get over it. And I definitely have had some of that internalized attitude about my own pain. I mean, it has come from exterior and interior, that idea. And we talked a little bit about that last time.
Yeah, it's very reinforced. Very
Yes.
reinforced.
And so segment number 2, what the heck did we mean last week when we talked about being tenderized?
What the heck?
And what the heck?
What the heck?
And I really do see tenderness as kind of the other end of toughness. So I do see that, well, man, there are a lot of analogies for this. We talk about, when there's damage, you grow scar tissue, and that's tough, right? It's not tender the way unhurt skin is. And lots of spiritual practices talk about nurturing a tender heart and not being toughened. And so when Emily talked about me and my tenderness, I'm not really sure exactly how or what to share about that. In preparation for this show, I asked, was I Emily's known me, well, what year did we meet? Maybe 2010,
yeah,
8 years ago.
Yeah.
Kind of said, was I tough still then, or was I tender? And, well, what did you say? You were like, yeah, you were kind of tough still.
I got a tough vibe. We didn't know each other very well when I first met you, but definitely there was some intimidation.
Okay.
And,
yes, I actually remember you telling me that.
Yeah, and you did have that, you just kind of had a tough look on your face, really.
So, and then what's funny to me about that is that before I had known Emily, I really was tough. Like, Emily definitely met me in 2010 when a lot of my toughness had dissipated, and I had way increased tenderness. And I even told an anecdote about how it was actually on my first date with a woman I later married. She told me that I was a good person. And I was moved to tears, her telling me this, that I was a good person. And she said, "Oh, are you crying?" And I said, "No, it's the wind." Like, I couldn't even, and I mean, I don't know if I was lying to myself or if I was just lying to her and I knew I was moved, but that's how disconnected I was. That's how tuned out to what was going on with me and under this flavor of toughness.
So you weren't even really that aware that you were making up that lie. You were just like, no, this is the wind.
It's the wind. It was automatic. I mean, my recollection now was a long time ago. Well, and I guess I can say that was 2003. I was 23 at the time. And I had already made some good headway in, like, repairing my life in a lot of ways. It wasn't like I was blowing in the wind still. Like, I was already very much attempting to practice spiritual principles. And I was still that tough. And now, Emily laughed hearing that story because it's hard for her to imagine me being that opaque.
Right, because you are moved to tears
very easily
more
and openly
often than most people I know.
Oh,
yeah, it's a compliment.
Thanks. So that's, sorry for the siren outside of our building where we're recording. So that's what we were talking about with this tenderness thing. Another quote from the Tamar material that we both were really grabbed by in the beginning. It says, "To deny pain in our lives is to walk a dangerous path that can lead to lifelong dysfunction." So just another incentive. I mean, I think we gave you a lot of incentive last time for why we think it's good and healthy to feel feelings, but we're just not alone in this invitation.
No, we're advocates for this, but while recognizing that there is another side to this. There is another argument. the toughness argument.
Oh.
And so I do think like,
I don't know if I'd say argument, but we're familiar with having had toughness rather than tenderness.
Right, we are.
Yeah.
And so another good, something that I fully stand behind is that it is a dangerous path to deny pain.
And I wanted to speak to how this getting tenderized related to me and my self-concept and even self-love and self-respect, really from that stance of toughness. I mean, even if you think about the anecdote I said about, oh no, it's the wind, not a lot of space for me to be knowing myself. Like clearly, I mean, now I'm saying I hear how tuned out I was. So not related to myself or what was going on with myself, which, doesn't leave space for self-love or respect.
No, it's like I shouldn't be feeling the way that I'm feeling. It needs to have been the wind.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I thought I might tell another little story about a kind of a big spell of tenderizing for me. And I don't know how cleanly I can tell the story, but I'll give it a shot. So around the time I was turning 30, I had a somewhat active social life. But leading up to my birthday, I had this kind of suspicion or growing sense that my social circle, that we maybe didn't care for each other all that much. That's kind of a hard thing to say. I want to make clear, this is not about blaming those people for not caring about me. I really am trying to share about my realization that I was spending time around people not being myself, not letting people know me in a way that I could feel known and cared for. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I also realized at that point that never before in my life had I really wanted to come to terms with this, because I was lonely enough that it seemed better to just spend time hanging out with whoever was around or would hang out with me, that it was, kind of anything preferable to actually being alone. And it wasn't until I was turning 30 that it started to seem better or more interesting to be on my own and try to foster friendships and relationships where we were being ourselves, so that we could really be known, know ourselves and know each other, and then have this care arise. Mm-hmm. Is that anecdote kind of clear, that how it's related to tenderness?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. I know, at least for myself, that that's something that I'm attempting to do now that I'm around that, turning 30 time period. And it's not an easy thing to allow yourself, I liked it how you said that, allow yourself to be cared for by others by being yourself. Yeah,
I guess I'll add to, most of my life I had this sense that people didn't really know me. Mm-hmm. And I think I thought that was their fault. And I started to kind of, and, there may have been times where it was, but there was also that I wasn't being myself. I wasn't transparent about knowing myself. So how could anybody know me? How could I feel known if I didn't know myself, mm-hmm. or wasn't going to be myself?
Right.
Okay. Segment number 3, transparency. Mm-hmm. So we talked quite a lot about feeling our feelings, which to some extent mushed into being transparent about our feelings. And we definitely wanted to circle back to that, in part because we had some questions, concerns, confusion arise about, well, are we talking about saying I feel sad when we feel sad? Or are we talking about letting sadness arise in whenever it does, and not hiding that?
So it's not so much about making it known or it being your job to make people around you understand, but just letting it arise as it comes up and
take its natural course.
Yes.
And I thought it might be useful to share that I had some coaching many years ago. This was actually from a relationship coach. And I don't remember the whole story, and I apologize if this is someone's hard one written work or something. Like, I would hate to think I'm stealing from somebody's idea, and I may be. I mean, I am, but I'm attributing it to the coach at least. So she said that often we want to act like news reporters about our feelings, and that this is not very effective, basically. That especially in relationships, we've gotten this kind of training to deal with our feeling in private, get mad in private, deal with it in private, process it, do whatever we need to do, and then go to our partner and report. Mm-hmm. So last Wednesday when you did this, I felt like this. Now what? Or, I don't know, like a news report. Yeah. And her suggestion was that an alternative was to, in the moment of being upset, to just not hide that. And that's it. Like that's the alternative, and to me, that's being transparent. Mm-hmm. There may be more questions about that, but I just wanted to include that for anyone's interest and use. I can certainly say this has made a difference in my relationships. I never really felt comfortable doing that reporting thing anyway. That wasn't a big habit of mine, but I haven't seen it be particularly effective in my relationships when I have done it. What I have found make big differences in not just romantic relationships, but in friendships, is when we can actually just authentically be feeling our feelings and share them at the time that they're happening. Mm-hmm. I find it really useful when people let me in on what's actually going on with them while it's happening. I'm thinking of how frequently, now I'm like, it's all over. Think like that's what Yelp is basically, is you were mad in the moment, but you're not going to say anything or be transparent about it. You're going to write about it later, and how, I don't know, fruitless might be too extreme, but it just doesn't seem super productive. And what would it be like if, while the bad service is happening, to be able to be transparent about, hey, this service isn't really working for me. Could we do something else? Or,
Right.
I'm a little off topic here, but it's so much easier to interact with people when they're being open about what's going on with them. I think about, sometimes somebody's late for an appointment with me, and, if they don't say anything about it, there's not space. Sometimes there's space to be transparent about how that affects us, and sometimes there isn't. And when there is, it can, it's a huge relief. Usually if somebody's late, I can tell them, oh, well, it works for me today to be late. Don't sweat it. Well, how useful. I mean, isn't that great to be able to then just, don't rush and stop and get a coffee. No big deal. And on another day, if you're late and you share that with me, I can be like, oh, hey, that doesn't work today. Mm-hmm. And then, it's like alleviation of unnecessary suffering.
Right.
That transparency. So I guess I'm maybe talking out of both sides of my mouth a little bit, because I'm talking about being transparent about the feeling, but now I'm actually talking about putting words to feelings.
Which is a natural thing to want to do, I think, is to want to put words to our feelings, and maybe not so natural, but maybe it's more something that we've been trained to do. But I know, at least for me, it is a knee-jerk reaction.
You feel sad and you want to say, I'm sad.
And maybe it is just someone who intellectualizes their feelings, but yes. And, or another word for that is someone who, I've heard teachers before say, bringing it from the head down to the heart, mm-hmm. But, I can want to stay up in that head when I'm feeling certain things, and that makes transparency an entirely different thing.
Adventure.
And I think that's why that's I think where a huge area of block is for me in this subject. And I've been talking to Paige about my block here and transparency, and I think that might have a lot to do with it, is the head heart thing. If I'm trying to report from my head or share from my head, that's going to be a lot of language and a lot of cause and effect, and so that's kind of where some
bump into blaming and responsibility
can come in, instead of just being in the heart and I feel this way, or oh my god, this is scary, or
oh yeah,
wow, I'm really feeling vulnerable and sad and scared and unsafe here with you, or whatever it is. Yeah.
We wanted to make sure we said that we see this transparency as a piece of this practice of being ourselves.
Right.
And, I don't know if it's common that people see the 12 steps as like tools to be ourselves. That's not how I came to them, but now I very much do see that they're tools to support us being ourselves.
That's kind of what it's come down to for me too.
And it's been sinking in for me that being ourselves is an antidote to, well, I'm going to even say the word abuse. So one definition of abuse that I like is any act which may diminish the sense of dignity, identity, or self-worth of a person. So the absence of abuse is going to include self-determination, being ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this language is sticky. I know. We just have to kind of try to slog through to be able to talk about this stuff. And when I'm talking about abuse, I mean, I guess sometimes I think of emotional abuse or sexual abuse, but even, what if substance abuse, if we brought this understanding to that too? Obviously there's substance use that doesn't diminish sense of identity, dignity, or self-worth of a person. And then there's substance abuse, where that is what's happening. So I think it could be a useful thing. And I don't want to hide. This show isn't about abuse or trauma, even though we're talking about that today. But it deeply matters to me to be a person interested in the prevention of all preventable suffering and harm.
Oh, yeah.
Including oppression and abuse.
Well, that's what matters to me now after that first, my first cycle of my life. And I think a lot of my purpose is all about recovering from abuse and being able to be myself and, determining, how am I abusing myself? How has society, tried to diminish me and silence me? And this is what matters to me. So I'm glad that we are talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. This practice of transparency also made me think I'd share a thing. I don't know if I made it up, but so bear with me. This is kind of another one of my analogies, but often we talk about, I'm going to use honesty. So we'll talk about I think of honesty as a principle and a practice. At some times in my life, I was not particularly concerned with being honest or practicing honesty. And I would say I was in the red, right? I was actively practicing dishonesty, telling lies, dishonest behavior, in the red on the scale with honesty. And, my first beginning to really get adequately interested in practicing honesty for me really just looked like getting to zero, getting out of the red and into the black of the practice. At some point, that actually made room to get interested in what I now think of as the blue. So above, so red at the bottom, black in the middle at zero, and then blue above. And for me, I think of this as creative, active practicing of being honest. Mm-hmm. So not just the absence of dishonesty, but the active practice of honesty. Mm. And for me, that really does include being transparent. For me now, mostly, and this is just my current adventure with honesty, it really is about actively sharing who I am with the people around me.
It's very this has all stemmed from the third step. We still are talking about the third step, and this just seems, that we're kind of circling back here to being able to be ourselves. And I think that that's a huge part of that, actually, that third step.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So our Citizen 12 third step is surrender how we live to what we trust to guide us. Mm-hmm. And for me, part of what I trust to guide me is a thing that I'm internally connected to.
Mm-hmm.
Who I am is actually related to what I trust to guide me.
Yes.
This is hard stuff to talk about, but I think that's
Yeah.
what I mean.
Yeah, and I think that was my point, is like returning to what I want to connect to in myself. There's a lot of internal drives that I'm like, I see you, but
I'm not trying to have you be in charge of my life.
I'm not trying to have you be in charge
sure,
of my life,
sure.
you know? But this is sticky work, because it is kind of like you kind of have to weed out, you know, what you want to bring forth into the world. But I think being transparent is, for me at least, a good step, because there hasn't really been much in transparency that I regret bringing forth.
Yeah, same. I mean, I'm now hearing you talk, thinking about really how many people do spend whole lifetimes not really even being interested in honesty.
Mm-mm.
And how that is a foundation. I mean, I'm not sure one could find themselves interested in being transparent if they're not even interested in honesty. They definitely are related. And I'm very grateful to share a community where this is a common value of ours, this practice of honesty.
Mm-hmm.
And into this blue, such a weird way of saying
well,
it, but
like,
blue transparency.
and you said earlier, like, creative honesty.
Yeah.
I like that. It really is, like, you know, it's such a positive idea to me. It's like this endeavor where we've done our best to, you know, and for me currently trying to be less dishonest. And then I have this fun thing. It's fun to look forward to, which is like creating honesty, and it can be so inspiring. I've seen people be inspired by me doing that and creating intimacy, and you know, it's not dull. It
is not dull.
No.
I agree. I don't know if this is a good segue, but so time for segment number 4, which we're calling things that maybe aren't feelings. And we brought some of this up in our last show. We'll start talking about anxiety. So we want to make it clear, we're not talking about disordered or pathological anxiety. We're talking about feeling anxious. Kind of sometimes we think maybe as a clue about what I think of as loose ends in our lives, or maybe even as a symptom of having not felt feelings, like having a clogged up, unfelt feelings. And this is one way I talk about it pretty often. So I'll meet with a new person and they'll report to me that they feel anxious, and I'll ask them, you know, what they mean by that. And, you know, usually at the front, they can't identify any particular thing to attribute that anxiety to. But when we probe a little bit, I have found that often there's some not very mysterious, good, like logical reasons why they might be feeling anxious. And the one I usually joke about is I find out that they've been parked in a 3-minute spot for the last 2 hours. And, you know, they're telling me that they feel anxious for no reason, or they don't know why. And I'm like, well, you know, that actually seems pretty appropriate to like be preoccupied or uncomfortable with having left your car in a 3-minute spot for 2 hours. But the talking about, I mean, so for me, that's like a loose end. I know that's a bit of a stretch, but I don't think we usually think of parking precariously as loose ends, but I use this term loose ends a lot, and I think it's a really useful thing to think about. Yeah. And I've learned a lot about loose ends in the like area of examining integrity. That's probably where I learned the most about loose ends. And I have spent years of my life getting interested in living without loose ends. And it's no small thing. It's a big adventure. In fact, maybe we could even do a whole show about restoring integrity in our lives and resolving loose ends. But the point here is that
it's kind of 4-steppy.
it is kind of four-steppy, yes. And we're actually
going to go there soon.
We're going to go there soon.
Yeah.
The reason that we're talking about it here is that I think it can be useful for people to identify if they're feeling anxious, that it might not just be, it could be not pathological. It could actually just be symptomatic of something that needs addressing. Nobody really was, for sure, when I talked to my physician about anxiety, they were not asking me about where I parked.
No.
Yeah.
And we're not experts in the difference between disordered anxiety and, loose end anxiety. I think the task is at least for me as an individual, I can ask myself that question about, do I have loose ends? And that can be a really good place to start with knowing like the nature of whatever anxiety I'm feeling.
Yeah. So the next kind of group of things that we thought maybe aren't feelings are fulfillment and satisfaction, especially fulfillment kind of instead of elation. So people I'm sure our listener, you have noticed that people, you maybe included, think about and talk about happiness a lot. Happiness is a big focus in people's lives.
It's becoming one of those words that bothers me now.
Happy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. I may join you. I think I probably have a hang up about the word happy. I've never identified as a happy person. People seem overly interested in happiness. But the part that I really want to share is that it matters very much to me to experience satisfaction and fulfillment in my life. And I actually do have a good amount of time where I am present to satisfaction and fulfillment in my life. And I think, a lot of that is that I have come to be living pretty well. So I have things that I feel satisfied about and fulfilled around. But I also have learned to notice when I can access feeling satisfied and fulfilled.
That sounds nice.
Yeah. It is nice. It's different. I definitely have made it a habit to be inviting the people in my life when I notice that they are feeling fulfilled to say, hey, it seems like you are really fulfilled right now. Like a lot of us just, I think, aren't related to when we are fulfilled. It's not a thing we're in the habit of noticing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The only thing that comes to mind for me, and this might sound sad, and I know it's not the only time I feel fulfilled, but food. That's something that I think, or at least maybe that's more satisfaction. Is like that's something that I think is an easy one for me to notice. Like
when you feel satisfied.
When I have been hungry and I eat and then I feel satisfied. But that's just because I'm a huge food lover. And but when it comes to other areas that are a little bit more, I guess, less concrete, I can see myself being really curious now about identifying those.
I'm excited for you. Is it okay for me to share that you teach yoga sometimes?
I do teach yoga.
I had this thought. I wonder if not every time you teach a class or while you're teaching a class, but I would bet that sometimes you feel satisfied and fulfilled when you're teaching.
After.
Okay, yeah.
After I teach, I do feel fulfilled.
I still wonder if it might even be about the noticing. I have a sneaking suspicion that you might even feel fulfilled while you're teaching, or that if you checked in to see if you were feeling fulfilled, that you may find you actually are. Not that to the exclusion of other feelings, like you might feel nervous or something in a class too.
Okay, yes, then yes. I guess that's a good thing, even though it's maybe obvious that to notice I can feel fulfilled and also nervous and whatever else at the same time.
Which is actually why sometimes I think maybe fulfillment isn't a feeling, is because some feelings it doesn't seem like I can have at the same time as other things. But actually I have found, and I noticed this during like hard conversations with my husband. So, and I don't know about the definition of fight. Sometimes we're like, well, we just don't fight. That's not how we have interacted with each other. But that's definitely, some people, I think, having heard some of the hard conversations we've had, would say, oh no, you've had fights. Yeah. So I don't really know about that definition. what I'm trying to say is there have been times where we have been in the midst of very difficult, hard talk. And I actually can get present to my gratitude and satisfaction for the connection, for the quality of our communication, even during this hard thing that we're trying to work through. Mm-hmm. So I
can relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's been a big victory for me to be able to feel discomfort and satisfaction at the same time. I think I'm pretty sure I didn't know that was possible. And it's been possible for me, which I think means it's possible for others.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a good evidence that maybe it's not a feeling. It's fulfillment. Yeah. And that we should use different language around it, because I think that matters.
Well, and like I said, I really am. It matters to me that we experience fulfillment and satisfaction in our lives, and whether or not we spend time being happy, like what I think of as elated, not as important to me. I mean, not unimportant, not worthless, but not something I spend my life ensuring is embedded in our community.
And it sounds too that maybe you're saying, like, you can't really, I mean, at least for me, I can't make myself feel happy necessarily, but it sounds like you're inviting people to think about how to make themselves feel fulfilled. Like it sounds like there's some power there for people to consider
access to satisfaction. Make ourselves sounds a little weird to me. Make ourselves feel something. Okay. Just a little forceful.
Or do something in our lives so that can take place.
Yeah.
Like maybe. For me. Yeah. Keep teaching yoga.
I guess again, this was my point. I don't actually think it's about the teaching yoga. I think it might actually be about you noticing when you actually just are fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, yes, it's got to be part of it to be doing the things that are related to being fulfilled. Okay. But maybe it won't be right for you to teach yoga on and on, you know?
Yeah.
So, but obviously complicated.
Right. It is complicated, but at least I guess what I'm getting out of it is that I can play some part in my fulfillment.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Or that it might already be there and we just hadn't noticed.
And we haven't noticed. And I think that's really what you're getting at. Yeah.
And then the last thing that we think is maybe not really a feeling is this thing do you know how when people say, oh, I feel bad. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm thinking about like somebody cancels on an occasion and they say, oh, I feel really bad, but mm-hmm. My experience is that isn't actually them being transparent and it doesn't seem like they're actually like sharing with me the sadness that they're feeling. It's something else. And usually it seems like a report of guilt. Right. And honestly, now that I'm saying that, I don't even know not that I'm saying people are lying about feeling guilty, but it kind of just seems like a thing people say to be off the hook. Oh, I feel bad. I feel bad about canceling, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Right. For me, the presence of guilt is
real.
Always there when I say that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I can't speak for everybody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and I think, but I do notice myself saying, okay, well, if you're going to cancel, just cancel. You don't need to share that piece about feeling bad because you're canceling.
That's really interesting. So I'm glad you said it that way. I think if I notice that I'm feeling bad, like if I'm going to cancel and I go, oh, that doesn't feel good, mm-hmm. I actually reassess what my plan is. Mm-hmm. I take that as some clue that something might be funky going on.
Absolutely.
And actually, that's exactly why I wanted to talk about this, is that I find guilt confuses the access to like productive interaction with having made mistakes. Mm. So if I just say I feel bad and I'm off the hook and then that's kind of the end of it, I don't know, it's not that useful.
And I do think that it's important that you're saying that because I have kind of observed that is something that happens. Like I feel bad off the hook anyway,
and then I'm off the hook.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all I had to say. Yeah.
Now, so if I notice I'm tempted to cancel. Oh, I feel bad. Then I check. Well, maybe canceling isn't the right thing to do.
Or maybe you're experiencing some sort of internalized message about, not being able to change your mind, or not being able to disappoint people, or whatever.
I find that often what it obscures is my readiness to be responsible for the outcome of like not keeping my agreement. So, which can be done powerfully. So I have had the experience where I can actually do something that's hard for someone else. Let's say it is cancel an engagement without feeling bad, while still taking responsibility for that wasn't the right thing to do. Like if I overbook myself, this is not an infrequent thing, that I would maybe make appointments too many days in a row and then find I need far more rest than I had anticipated.
Right.
These days, what usually seems right is to take good care of myself,
right,
to preserve my health. And sometimes that does mean canceling an engagement.
Watching yourself make that mistake of having overbooked yourself.
But I'm clear that my mistake was overbooking myself. And it's powerful to regret that. Like, it has been very effective for me to actually be able to put myself in the position of regretting overbooking, because I then have access to not doing that anymore.
Instead of, and I think you might been practicing this for so long that you don't remember that in the presence of regretting just the fear of what this other person is how they're gonna react, and what you're gonna cause, and getting all caught up in that, and regretting that instance. And that's, to me, that's kind of regretting the wrong thing, or it's not focusing on the mistake I actually did make.
Yeah, that sounds like guilt, what you just described.
Yeah.
Feeling guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which you've said is not so productive.
Yeah, it's kind of, it fizzles out. It's like, okay, you feel guilty, so what? It's like saying, well, I'm sorry. Well, okay, well, now what?
It fizzles out is a good term, because the person that you're canceling on, they're going to forget about it. You're going to forget about it. Life goes on. You're going to feel, maybe you'll writhe in regret for like an hour or whatever. But like, if you do pay attention to, I overbooked myself yet again, this seems to be a pattern, wow, then that sounds a lot more, that's been more productive. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna invite you to how to say this, that what you just said, I've overbooked myself again, this seems to be a pattern, that still seems pretty weak to me. And yes, probably headway over I feel bad about canceling, and I know this is like an ongoing adventure that we are all having together, and this is a great teaser for our next show. So next time we are going to talk about inventory and the fourth step, and the Citizen 12 fourth step, take searching and fearless moral inventory of our errors. That's our Citizen 12 four-step. So we will, there's so much about regret and errors and mistakes and guilt and how many of us feel like we're all clearly sorted out about these issues? Not many. So we'll talk about these things next time.
Great.
Did you say great?
Great, yes.
Yeah.
I just love how it just sort of naturally has led here.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. So last segment number 5, we wanted to tell a little bit more of the story about being separated. So Emily had shared about a period of our friendship where we had not been close, and you attributed this to, in part, withheld communication. Well, what did you say? You said...
I didn't use that word.
You didn't use that word, did you? You said you had stuff going on in your life that you weren't being transparent about and weren't sorting out, and that you didn't feel comfortable around me, or something like that.
Yeah, being too aware. I was self-aware enough to know, which I'm grateful for, that I was not being transparent about some things that were big enough to just feel too much shame about, I guess. And yeah,
And the point here is that this is a known barrier to intimacy and connection, and again, why it makes so much sense to, after a third step, surrendering how we live to what we trust to guide us, practice a fourth step, taking searching and fearless moral inventory of our errors. Again, what we're going to talk about next show. Okay, I want to put in a plug for writer Emily Nagoski, who wrote a book called Come As You Are. And I love the book. I love her voice. I believe she uses she pronouns. I think she's great. I thought the book was great. But I am talking about it here because she gives, in what I think are very clear instructions about how to feel feelings in a safe, healthy way. I just love what she wrote. And I really recommend that.
I will pick up a copy.
I'll put some information in the show notes about that. And then also we will come back to how damning is powerful, damning of feelings, like we talked about last episode. And that, there are times when we do that to exert control, but we're going to do it in a show about the first step, which is accept we have limited power and that attempting to manage our lives does not solve all our problems. So we'll do that episode about a first step, which totally will include that, of course, it's powerful to dam up feelings and that's part of our incentive for doing it. We'll do it when we do a show about the first step. Okay, we will undoubtedly come back to all of these topics again, but that's all for now. Thank you for joining us. This show isn't a thing without you. Please find us online, chime in, write to us. We are listening for how best to serve. We're on Instagram, Facebook, SoundCloud, and Twitter, all at C12POD. That's C12POD. It looks to us as though our community could really use this content, and we're excited to create and share it. This is a 100% listener-supported show. So if you already like what you're hearing, or even if you don't, but you think what we're up to is good, please contribute through Patreon at patreon.com/C12pod. And support us by subscribing to our show through whichever tool you use to listen to podcasts, and submit a review on iTunes and Facebook or wherever you listen to the show. We're hosting Discord spaces for patrons, and we'll include a Dear Citizen segment in future shows. So support us and write in with your questions about practicing the principles of the steps.
Thank you.
Thank you.